Hi, this is a video about mainstreaming our own issues. And that means two things. First of all, setting our own public and social agenda. And the second part of that is speaking to it publicly. So, what do I mean by setting our own agenda? There are lots of things which are going on in society at the moment. And the way we get to find out about them is mostly through the mainstream media. The mainstream media has issues that are of concern to it and its principal constituencies. It's really unfortunate that actually the issues that confront and really determine success, failure, joy, happiness, frustration, success for people of African origin are not on the agenda of the mainstream media. So, for example, one of the biggest issues that's in play at the moment is the whole issue of the vaccination. Now, there is public resistance to the vaccination. Some people don't have any issues around the vaccination. What concerns me is that many people in authority, people forming public policy, are making assumptions about what PAO, black folk in Britain, think, know and believe about this vaccine. It's all the more worrying because actually they have no idea, the people who are making the policy have no idea of our lived experience on the receiving end of medical public policy. There is not one black person who hasn't heard of the Tuskegee experiments, in which hundreds of African Americans were knowingly infected with syphilis, knowingly untreated by the experimenters to watch the long-term progression of the disease, when in fact they were told by the experimenters that they were doing research into blood and they were actually helping them improve their health. Clinton had to come out and make a groveling apology about the huge damage that these human guinea pigs experience. Elsewhere, there have been many allegations of vaccination programs and their impacts in Africa, in Kenya, in India, in Nigeria, in other parts of Africa, in which there have been allegations of terrible consequences for the recipients of those treatments. The response, the way to deal with this has been for websites, people who spoke about these things being taken down on public media. And these allegations and so on being fact-checked by people whose fact-checking, people who look like me, don't have any faith in. What does that do to public trust? I can tell you, it does nothing at all. Long and short of it is that the actual, real and lived anxieties, let's set aside for a moment. It could be a fantasy. It could be based on completely false information. But first of all, these issues must be addressed in a way in which the receiving audience understands, so that it can go forward and work with government in finding a solution to this awful pandemic that we're all having to live through. There's another thing about black doctors. When I was at school, my roommate was actually a medical student, and through him at university, um, I made a lot of friends. It seemed that I had more friends in medical school than anywhere else. There were two things about the med students. They were usually brighter than the rest of the people in the university, but there were lots of bright kids in all the different faculties. I went to the School of Business. There were lots of bright people there as well. I mean, you needed a high grade point average to get into the School of Administration at the University of Ghana. But what was extraordinary about the medical students, and what really stood them apart from everybody else, was how hardworking they were on a consistent basis. So they were bright and they were hardworking. Not one of them ever came along and told me, Ted, you know what, I'm a medical student and I'm really bright. I could see. By talking with them, by working with them, I could tell these guys were usually a cut above. Secondly, none of them came along and said, look at me, how hardworking I am, and so on and so forth. I could tell early in the morning when they were running off to do their tutorials, their practicals, and their lab experiments and their lectures, and they seemed to have more examinations than anybody else. I could tell these people are hardworking. They never got hammered like the people in the law faculty, in the business school, in the politics department, and so on. They never got hammered the night before and thought, oh, I'm going to skip this lecture tomorrow. They never cut their classes. So by my observation, I could stand up and vouch for this group. However, you bring them over here to Europe, they work very hard to validate their credentials and to climb up the career ladder. And it is also my observation that they work in perhaps the most regulated industry of them all, which is medicine. For that reason, I'll be frank, sometimes you don't know whether what the medicus is telling you is more about giving you the orthodoxy so that he can keep his license, or whether it's actually what he personally believes. Now, that is an issue that goes to trust. And if other people aren't saying it, I'm saying it here and now. There is a thought that a lot of people in medical practice these days are the instruments of big pharma. All of these things are running around, and all of these things influence the way people perceive what doctors are saying. I don't care what the authorities say we should think about them, just as I wouldn't care if when I was at university anybody told me there were a bunch of lazy people who weren't very bright. I experienced what I thought about them. My opinion of them was informed by what I saw. I trusted my own eyes and interactions. So when it comes to allaying the fears, say, of the minority ethnic community, the authorities should not for 1 second think that black folk aren't aware of the pressures under which black doctors and so on are working under. Then we look at the history of the performance of the government when it comes to the demonstrably high, apparently a man like me is 2 times as likely to die of COVID than if I was white with everything else equalized. How does that look? We still haven't had a satisfactory reason for why this is so. Now, do you really think that this is great for confidence? Those are just 2 examples, and they speak to the issue of what our issues are and who brings those issues to the table. The second part of what I was talking about was raising these issues publicly. When I look on Facebook and a lot of social media, I find PAO, I find people of African origin, mostly talking to each other, very rarely to society. And when we talk to each other, we mostly know what each other know. I'm the last person that another black person should be trying to explain what their experience. I get it. I probably live it. I probably echo it. It is to the wider society, which is taking decisions that impact us every day, that our voices should be raised and expressed. So, mainstreaming our issues means raising our voices in society. And again, there's a recurring theme here, something I keep mentioning all the time. The saddest thing of all is that it is those with the highest profile who are the most mute within the black community. Sad, isn't it? Except for the odd unicorn, Lewis Hamilton. Ironically, this is a man who takes his life in his hands every time he walks into his office, his F1 car. He takes his life. Every time he sits behind that wheel could be the last time he gets out of that car. And yet, look at the way he so publicly speaks out. There are countless people in the media, mostly muted because they don't want to upset the corporate line. Oh, by the way, I should state that the T-shirt I'm wearing has it's for Yanga TV, but what I'm saying is entirely my own thinking. It has nothing to do with the editorial positions of that company. So there we are. We need to be speaking these issues in public, and everybody who is a person of African origin must realize that until we speak what we think, white society, the mainstream society, will tell us what we allegedly think. And that vacuum of speech from our community is something which in 2021 must be filled by nobody other than we ourselves. I'm going to post this thing on YouTube. Please hit the subscribe button underneath so that I can continue to do these videos. Please also hit the like button so that you are less likely to miss it when it comes up on YouTube. That would be great to help us continue to have these conversations. Very soon I'm going to be talking about another aspect in which how mainstreaming our issues can really affect our quality of life. Thanks so much for listening.